Hey, everybody, welcome back to the channel. I have a special guest that you might have seen, the uneducated economist. Thank you for being here, bud.
Yeah, thank you for having me on your show today.
Today, we're going to talk about the Cantillon effect. It was Richard Cantillon back in the 1800s or the 18th century, and how we're living that out now. I think we both agree on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Richard Cantillon, he wrote an essay hundreds of years ago, and it was one of the first essays that was detailing the economy. And in that essay, he wrote about the increase and decrease of money to the state. And this increase and decrease of money to the state is often known as the Cantillon effect, or a lot of people refer to it as Cantillon effect because of the way it's spelled. But being a French guy, it was Cantillon. Yeah, great, interesting theory that he has.
Okay, so international trade allows a state to exchange small amount of product, labor, for a large foreign product or labor. And that's kind of what we're seeing. Like the manufacturing industry has been hollowed out. I could share a chart with you that'll kind of show you uh, what's going on. But can you expand on that with our trade, our industry moving overseas because we export? I know dollars aren't an export; they're not supposed to be, but that's what we export the most of, and in return, we get the better half. We get the better deal. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Now, when we think about like what Richard Cantillon was describing back in his day, they didn't have things like the United States Treasury Department or Federal Reserve or anything like that. They had silver and gold. That's what they used. And when Richard Cantillon was describing the increase and decrease of money to the state, he was describing it through the use of a silver mine. But really, you can replace the silver mine with the Federal Reserve or the Treasury or however you want to expand the new currency. But it's all about the new money. That's what really the ticket is the new money coming into the system and what ends up happening when that new money does come into the system. So, for example, with the silver mine, the people who had first access to the silver miners, the property owners, and the people who worked for those silver miners, they were the ones who had first access to the money. And what does everybody do with new money? Like anytime you ever get a new job or you inherit money or whatever, you want to spend that money. You want to increase your standard of living. You want to drive a better car. You want to live in a better house. You want to have, nicer clothes and food. And back in Richard Cantillon's day, it was no different from today. Like, this is the human experience. You work hard, you want to spend that money. Well, what ends up happening as people spend this money into the economy and they start increasing their standard of living, what they are doing is they are moving into luxuries. And now, as the new money starts to move into the standard of living or the higher standard of living, and it starts moving into luxuries, what you end up finding is that the consumption that has risen from all these people who have access to this new money is now causing a separation between the rich and the poor as the added consumption starts to cause the prices to move up. So with added consumption, you have supply demand imbalances. Ever increasing amounts of new money pour in. The people who have first access to that money get to continue to spend that money, buying into the luxuries, depriving, the people at the other end, the lower end, who have not increased their wages, and now they're suffering with these higher prices. So now something very interesting begins to happen as these higher prices start to take place. The people with the new money don't really want to spend that money on higher priced items. They start importing foreign production. So people who are producing it cheaper now bring in foreign competition, and that starts driving out domestic manufacturing. And this is the natural course that starts to take place as ever increasing amounts of new money continue to come in. So if this continues, this new money pouring into the system, you will find ever increasing amounts of separation between the rich and the poor. You will find ever increasing amounts of foreign production coming in. You will find ever increasing amounts of domestic manufacturing leaving. And you will find that the opportunities for the people to move on the other side of the wedge become incredibly difficult until the new money turns off and everybody falls into poverty. So for the United States, we actually experienced something very, very close to this. I mean, you think about it, how many times have you heard the stories of a single income could produce enough money for an entire household, the car, the family, the college, the vacations, the retirement, and that was all off of a single income. Well, we were a producing nation. We produced the world's greatest stuff. We sent it out there to the world, and the world sent us their money. They sent us their gold, right? So now the United States was increasing its standard of living by all this gold that they were acquiring, but this in turn did something to the rest of the world, and it deprived the world of gold. And now their ability to do transactions began to deplete. This is where the United States should have, according to Cantillon effect, relinquish that gold back out there to the rest of the world, but instead we severed ourselves from the gold standard and started going into debt, ever increasing amounts of debt, pouring that debt out there to the world, and the world sending us their stuff. And this is one of the reasons why we have such a dramatic separation between the rich and the poor. Anyway, that was a
Well,
quick rundown.
that's great, man. That's great, and you can. It doesn't take very long to see it in real life. We're living out the end of the old currency, at the end of the new currency. The United States was, blessed to be the world reserve currency. That's the new money, right? And now it went to the boomers, I would say. They probably got to benefit the most out of the new currency. And as home prices soar from money printing and all the other things that are going up, the people that got to enjoy the new money have invested it in foreign manufacturing to get cheap imports, and it's perfect. I don't see how this is not spot on.
Yeah. Well, it explains, like, it takes away a lot of the blame, right? Because like everybody wants to point the finger and say it's their fault or their fault or whatever. And there's plenty of blame to go around, so it's reasonable to have that sort of ideas. But ultimately it comes down to the human nature and what happens when you get new money coming in. Like, if the people were not of if the human nature didn't have people thinking, okay, I worked hard, I've saved, and I want to enjoy it. Like, that's human nature. You can't stop that from happening. Ultimately, that is the exact problem that starts to take place, because it's the move into luxuries, that rise in standard of living that starts increasing the prices, and then it starts bringing in foreign competition. And it's just like, it's almost the natural consequences of human nature that takes place when you start working hard in producing and saving. As far as
Yeah,
the go ahead.
no, I wasn't blaming the boomers. I'm just saying that just happened to be the people that
They,
got to enjoy it.
yeah, they know they were in the perfect spot for it, right? They were at the time of mass production, distributing wonderful products to the world. That was like the moment of, like, being able to raise your standard of living in the most, profound way that was most distributed to the people out there. But it's only a matter of time before that eventually changes, before you move beyond, your ability to produce and come and compete against the rest of the world. Like, you can just see it, like, today in solar panels. No matter what you do, you're never going to compete against China. I don't care how much subsidies or tariffs or anything you put onto the system, you're never going to be able to compete against China when it comes to solar panels. Now, granted, there might be other places that produce better, higher quality solar panels, and I don't doubt that. But when it comes to the competition of what it is that a cheap solar panel can do as opposed to an expensive, high quality one, most people are probably going to end up pouring into China's solar panels.
I got a little list of imports here:
Yeah, go for it.
software, movies, entertainment, financial services. Exports, much larger quantity of machinery and consumer goods. Now, here's a few that I'd like to, you know, prepping. When it comes to prepping, I want you to understand this list is what the United States imports from other countries: China, Japan, Germany. Apparel, footwear, industrial machinery, automotive parts, electronics, pharmaceuticals, optical and medical instruments, electrical equipment. There's These things will go up in price, and it's just part of it. The currency is starting to die off, and now we're starting to see it in the other countries taking a loss, more than likely China taking a loss on getting out of its bonds. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit, because I know you talk about bonds quite often. Because my main question is, who's going to pull the slack? Who's going to loan the government $100,000 a second? Where's that going to come from as things decay?
Yeah. Which one of those you want to hit first?
Well, talk about the bonds, because that's
Sure.
I just don't know where it's going to come from.
Right. So I guess probably the major concern that people are seeing right now is that there is like the dumping of U.S. Treasuries. I think that's kind of like what, to maybe explain it quickly.
Yeah,
And
Treasury.
that like China is unloading their U.S. Treasury debt at a loss. And other nations are somewhat similar to this very fashion. And then the idea behind this is that if they're unloading their U.S. Treasuries, what is it that the United States is going to do as far as selling their treasuries off and not having a buyer like China or these other nations out there? I think that's probably like the major concern.
They just
Right.
had an awful bond auction.
Right. And this was actually something that was foreseen by the U.S. Treasury a year ago, better than a year ago, and that there was going to come a time in which that the U.S. Treasury market was going to become fairly illiquid, right? Which is, meaning that there's somebody out there who wants to either buy or sell, and there's not a buyer seller out there. That's an illiquid market. The U.S. Treasury is by far the deepest, most liquid market in the entire world. The U.S. Treasury is almost considered as good as cash because of how liquid that market is, to be able to buy and sell the Treasury instantaneously. The moment that it doesn't have that sort of like confidence behind it, it begins to erode everything within the financial markets. It is absolutely critical that this market stays liquid. And the Treasury knows this. So if there was all of a sudden a moment in which people are unloading a bunch of treasuries and the market becomes illiquid, meaning that there's not as many buyers out there to try and absorb these treasuries, the Treasury itself said, we will buy back our own bonds. In fact, they made this statement earlier this month again, right? They reiterated that they are going to do this. And at the very same time, the Federal Reserve is also doing something with their balance sheet that is very unique to adding liquidity to the Treasury, and that is that they are backing off on the unwinding of their balance sheet. So ultimately, the Federal Reserve is not printing money. They're in quantitative tightening. They're actually pulling money out of the system right now. A lot of people don't realize that, but that's what's happening. And they're unloading treasuries, meaning that at the end of the month, some treasuries are coming due, meaning that the Federal Reserve is getting paid the principal and interest rates off these treasuries. They take that money, roll it back over into treasuries. But right now, they're unwinding the balance sheet, meaning that these treasuries are not all the money that these treasuries are paying are not rolling back over into them. The Federal Reserve is literally taking this money off the table and it's disappearing, right? However, at the end of the month, the Federal Reserve is going to adjust that and they're not going to take as much money off the table anymore. So they're going to be able to provide a little bit of liquidity through the reduction of the unwinding of the balance sheet. I know that's kind of complicated to think about, but both the Treasury and the Federal Reserve are stepping up at the exact same time to try and provide a more liquid market for the U.S. Treasuries this month. Right now, this was foreseen a year ago. Now, when you think about what it is that the Chinese government or any of these other nations out there are doing when it comes to unloading a U.S. Treasury, what happens when you sell a Treasury? You get cash. They're actually trying to acquire cash. That's what these nations are doing. They're not unloading treasuries. They're in debt in US dollars, and they need to acquire US dollars in order to pay their dollar denominated debt, which is far greater than anybody ever could possibly realize how deep that market really goes. And so when I see these nations selling treasuries at a loss, that's not because they want to, it's because they have to. They have to do it in order to get the cash they need in order to pay their dollar denominated debts. And if they don't do it, they are going to lose their credit ratings and things are going to start to seize up within their financial markets. It is critical that they pay their dollar denominated debts. That's what I feel that they're up to. But nobody really discusses it in that fashion, except for maybe people like Jeff Snyder or Brent Johnson.
No, that's good. I like both of those guys.
Yeah, me too.
That's
I saw.
a different take.
Yeah, I met both of them personally, had conversations with them. They're excellent dudes,
Yeah, I have too. I hung out with Brett a little bit.
Have you? Yeah.
Yeah, big tall guy wearing
Yeah,
Bermuda
it
shorts.
amazes me. All these economists are like super tall. They're all like 6'6", man.
So trade deficit, we hear
Yeah,
that a lot. And a simple way to put that would be to import more goods and services than you export, right?
that's right.
Well, that would be a really plain way to say it.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure what you just said about how they're dumping the bonds because they need the cash. How does that affect the consumer? How does that affect me and you?
Well, ultimately, if you have people who are dumping treasuries, that's going to start lowering the treasury price and start increasing the yields,
Hmm.
which is going to then reflect into the financial markets as far as interest rates on car loans, house loans, stuff like that. So the consumer is burdened by this idea when the interest rates rise. Right? Now, on a flip side of that, there is a long distance run that actually benefits the consumer when you have a return on capital investment because of the higher interest rates, but that's like more of a longer road view. The short term is that they're going to be burdened by the higher interest rates, less consuming of cars and houses and stuff like that. So
It sounds like it'd be a good time to get into long dated treasury bonds,
yeah, now I mean I guess that's
leveraged.
right. And again, we have to kind of also consider, like, is it going to be longer interest or higher interest rates for longer, which would mean that you might want to be in a waiting position to get into the treasuries because there'll be buying opportunities in the future for it. But really, if you're just looking for return on yield, then you have to kind of look at that and say, okay, well, is it going to beat inflation? Is the yield that I'm going to get on it really, sufficient enough to have a return on that capital that's going to beat the inflation scenario that we may be experiencing. So there's a couple of ways to kind of look at that one. Me personally, I'm not much for financial advisory. That's not really what I do. I let kind of everybody else make their own financial decisions on it. But there is a couple of schools of thought as far as whether or not you would want to move into treasuries at this point.
Hugh Henry answered a question of the day. It was if he had $1 million to invest, what would he do? And he said 40% Bitcoin, uh, treasury bonds, and short foreign currencies. And I've been studying the stock market every day, too much, like probably 6 or 8 hours a day. And that's exactly what's happening. The foreign currencies are getting smacked, and they have been since 2008. I mean, just since we've let Pandora out of the box, and Bitcoin has doing what it does, crazy. And now that we see what's going on, have a little better view of what's happening with Treasury bonds. It seems to be solid advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I know you're not either. I think Hugh probably is.
Yeah.
Now, um, where do I want to go with this next? What are you seeing in like unemployment? Your quantitative tightening is what we're experiencing now. I agree with you 100%. They want unemployment. They want the economy to cool off. We got to get inflation down at all cost. The number they give us is a lie. How did in your head, you kind of have a idea. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but how does this? Do we have a major deflation due to higher interest rates raising the bond yields spills over into your home mortgage going to 10, 12%. It's already at 8. The and I've said 10% is not, that's a drop in the bucket to what it could go to. And especially after the election, if a certain president gets in, they're probably going to dump this thing on his head like a, you know, I'm try not to get into politics too much.
Sure.
But how do you see it working out?
Well, okay, so I think we're probably moving into monetary policy on this part of the discussion.
Okay.
And this is probably something that I have in my opinion, probably one of the most unique views on YouTube when it comes to monetary policy, because I really don't feel that the Federal Reserve is trying to bring inflation down in the way that a lot of people are anticipating it. Right? A lot of people are looking at the Federal Reserve saying they screwed up, they let inflation run too hot, they should have taken care of it business earlier, and now they are stuck in a position in which that they cannot get the inflation to come back down and are essentially lost control. Now, I disagree with this. I disagree with this notion, right? This narrative is incorrect. Here's something that I have probably stated 400 times on my channel. And I got this from a speech that was given by John Williams. He's the president of the New York Fed. This is a speech that was given in November of 2018, and it's called Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World. In this statement, he had something very profound to say. He said, "Today we face an altogether different set of problems stemming from a very low neutral interest rate. That is, the short-term real interest rate consistent with an economy operating at its potential alongside low and stable inflation. Ironically, the problem we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high." So that's something very interesting to hear. The problem that needed to be solved was an inflation that was persistently too low rather than too high. So they needed to solve the problem and make it too high. That's what they would rather have. And this is exactly the situation that they are now conducting themselves in, and it is the appropriate monetary policy for their conducting of interest rate settings, because interest rate setting doesn't work for them. Let me see if I can break this down a little easier. The Federal Reserve lost control of financial markets with the ability to adjust interest rates through their typical mechanism of Fed funds, right? They hit the lower bound of zero, meaning that it was done. They were out of ammo. From that point on, they knew that it was going to take other creative ways of being able to stimulate the economy, and that the adjustment of interest rates was no longer going to work. And the main problem that we were facing here was something called the neutral interest rate. Now, this gets really, really complicated to understand, but the neutral interest rate is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. It's neutral, right? However, this neutral interest rate had almost gotten to zero, meaning that when the Fed went to go stimulate, they would hit zero and it wouldn't stimulate because they couldn't get past neutral, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now all of a sudden they're realizing, man, we cannot find the inflationary stimulative aspects to the economy like we normally would when we would drop interest rates. Normally it would go down 5%. People would start to get stimulated by the idea of buying houses and cars and going on vacation and spending this money into the economy. But if you hit the lower bound of zero and you're at neutral, then there is no stimulation taking place. Quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 proved this to be the case. Now, granted, there was some asset price inflation, houses and stocks and bonds and stuff like that went up, but the Federal Reserve failed to produce the inflationary scenario that they were looking for, even after expanding the balance sheet from $850 billion to 4.5, better than 4.5, it was like 4.7 or something, trillion dollars. It was quadrupling of the balance sheet that failed to produce an inflationary scenario that they were looking for, is because most of that money ended up on the balance sheets of big banks. And unless it was lent into the system, it never really started chasing goods and services or anything like that. That's why you saw the houses and stocks and bonds go up, because you can borrow money to buy those things, especially
But
if you
we're
can
not
borrow
talking
it
about
at zero.
CPI. You're not
What's
talking
that?
about CPI. You're not talking about
Yeah.
CPI.
Well, there's
Yeah,
a lot of
that's
ways of looking at inflation, right? You got the consumer price, producer's price, you got all kinds of different inflationary scenarios. But really, what is inflation, right? Inflation is the expansion of money and credit. Prices are the results of that. And so a lot of times when we hear about inflation, we're actually talking about the symptoms of inflation and not necessarily inflation itself. Right now, where does inflation come from? It comes from an imbalance of supply and demand, right? So prices get moved up when you have supply and demand imbalances. How do you get a supply and demand imbalances? Is that you increase consumption or you restrict supply. Well, what if you do both at the exact same time? Right? You are going to have inflationary scenarios. But if you only blame it in one direction and not on the other, then it becomes very confusing on what it is that's creating the inflationary scenario, because most people don't look at a supply demand imbalance. They look at money printer go burr, and that's the only reason. And this is where a lot of the confusion starts to come into the economy. And believe me, the Federal Reserve is using that as their monetary policy. It's pushing propaganda unlike anybody could ever imagine. If you are hearing a statement literally coming from a mainstream media talking anything about the Federal Reserve or monetary policy, it is propaganda. I guarantee you, it is pushing a perception into your mind that will then lead you in the direction that thing has the Federal Reserve conducting their monetary policy. If you go and you look at their speeches and their statements to the other bankers, it is a completely different communication that has taken place. And so when you realize that the monetary policy had come to an end with the adjustment of interest rates, the perception that the people have, the feelings that they have about the interest rate adjustments is the monetary policy within itself, not the changing of it, because that doesn't work. Is the perception that people have. Now, this is really interesting to think about because really it comes down to unemployment for the Federal Reserve, because most people are looking at the dual mandate. The Federal Reserve is mandated to do two things: low and stable prices and full employment. Now, there used to be a time they called it maximum employment, but they changed the wording on it. And a lot of people don't even realize that they had done this, but it was very critical to the monetary policy, this little verbiage change from maximum to full. See, maximum employment said that the Federal Reserve had a neutral employment rate. See, this is very interesting to think about as well. And that the unemployment or employment that was taking place in the economy would then start adding to the consumption, right? More people working, more people consuming, supply demand imbalances, and now you have price increases, inflationary scenario. So if they could create an economy or a situation in which that the economy would then start going into business hiring, expansion, and hiring people, then you could get more people working, more people consuming causes supply demand imbalances, inflation starts to take place. Something interesting was found and discovered by the Federal Reserve, because this was referred to as the Phillips curve. Anyway, they found that failed. That came to an end. When they hit the lower bound of zero and the neutral interest rate had gone to zero, the neutral unemployment rate had now become close to zero as well. And that stimulating the economy with a historically low unemployment rate to create the inflationary scenario didn't work. Like, think about it. At the end of the Trump administration, we had best jobs number in the entire, like just about 60 years or whatever it was, and there was no inflation. Right? Even Trump was saying there's no inflation. The Fed should be printing money, taking it into negative interest rates. Low unemployment, historic good jobs numbers didn't produce the inflationary scenario that it typically would have taken place when the Fed had moved the interest rates into that lower territory. So they knew it doesn't matter anymore. You can have as many people working as you want. It won't create the inflationary scenario. So now you can have full employment, as many people as you want. See, there used to be a maximum. You couldn't go beyond this without creating inflationary scenarios. Now, full employment takes place. So here we have like an economy that is operating in which that you have all these jobs that are showing up, but yet you have inflation or recessionary pressures taking place at the exact same time. Why? This is the separation between the rich and the poor that has taken place.
Man,
It's if you take in the Cantillon effect, all of a sudden it starts to make sense.
yeah, it is spot on.
I get really into this and I start talking like fast, so I know a lot of times
Yeah,
it gets confusing. If you need me to kind of clarify it again, I can go
yeah,
over
you're a fire
something.
hose, man. I just want to make it. I just want to make it real clear. Uh, Money printer go burr isn't exactly what everybody thinks it is. Money's created by loans, and they pay it back, and it's over. That's how it's injected in the economy. Quantitative easing seems to always leach into the economy, but it's not supposed to. They have ways that it doesn't. But for some reason, why does a $20 bill not buy what it used to? That's the you know we can go through all the policies and what the Fed's doing, but fact is, our the things we buy every day are going up in price. And I asked the lady at the gas station, I was forget what it was. I said, why is that so expensive? She said, inflation. I said, no. She said, I don't know. The prices are just going up. I said, do you think that's inflation or just it's more expensive? She said, it's just prices are going up. There's a little bit of a disconnect there.
Mm-hmm.
So with all that being said, why doesn't a dollar buy what it used to? If
Yeah.
they're, what's that underlying thing?
This is confusing. This is confusing to a lot of people because they go out there and they spend their money and they say just like that. I used to take a $20 bill and I could buy a bag of chips, a rack of beer, and this and chicken strips and
Yeah.
all that. Now I can only get a rack of beer and it's pissing me off, right? So this is like the same story that I hear quite a bit, and it is so true to think, right? I mean, this is an obvious thing that is happening within the economy. Now, what I find very interesting is that a lot of times when we want to point at something that's going up in price, we look at one of the most expensive things out there, and lumber happened to be one of them, right? And now I happen to be in the lumber industry. I do retail sales for a living. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I know loggers, I know truck drivers, I know mill operators, I know other vendors, distributors, wholesalers. There's no part of the lumber market I don't know. It's what kind of made me famous on YouTube. Now, when lumber was at its all-time high, it was trading at something called 1,700 per thousand, which equated down to about a $13 2x4 8 standard and better. This was outrageously priced. Like, I wasn't selling a whole lot of 2x4s at that price. However, everybody wanted to say, look at the money printer causing this to happen. And I was one of the few people out there who said, no, this is not the money printer. This is a complete supply demand breakdown that's taken place. And what is everybody going to say when we find lumber back down at its normal price? Here we are today. 480 per thousand. This is the same price that we were experiencing back in 2017, years and years and years and years ago, before all the inflationary scenarios. So inflation has completely left lumber. Doesn't exist in lumber anymore. Hasn't.
Supply
Like
and
gone.
demand.
Right?
You're saying it's
Supply.
a supply and demand
It's a supply and
on
demand.
certain
Now,
items. Can you
right.
name one that's down that's other than lumber?
How about oil?
Is lumber down? Well,
Right?
I guess
Oil
you
is
could
at
argue
50%, right?
oil's
There's all kinds of
80
reasons. I
bucks.
get it.
What is it,
Right? There's
$79, $80?
Right. It's 50% of its all-time high. How about silver? 50% of its all-time high. There's the three major commodities that are most vital to this human existence, lumber, oil, and silver, are down at 50% of their all-time highs. What does that say? Right? Like, I mean,
Yeah, that's
I'm not,
right.
I want to believe the situation. Like, so I have to understand it for what it is, right? Now I look at these three commodities being some of the most vital commodities to the human in existence, and they're at 50% of their all-time high. And everybody wants to point at, like, a bag of chips and talk about how expensive it is. And I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be something more to this, right? And this is really where I find that this speech, monetary policy strategies for a low neutral interest rate world, really starts to tell the tale, right? That supply and demand breakdowns that had occurred now has incorporated prices into just about everything out there. If you have a domestic supply that has no reliance on anything foreign, not the transportation, not the people, not the energy, nothing, right? It is 100% domestic. Tell me, how hard was it to be reestablished once the economy opened back up? It would be almost instantaneous. That's what we found
Mhm.
in lumber, right? Now, you think about it, if we have tariffs, if we have subsidies, if we have issues with these foreign other people who are now contributing to the parts and pieces that we need to make our economy function at a more efficient manner, and we're having issues with that, well, then guess what? We're going to see prices moving up. Uh-huh. So we have to understand it for what it is. Not all this is working in a holistic manner.
Uh-oh. I lost you. Gone, just like that. All right, guys. Well,
We're
Andy's
back.
back.
Okay, we're back. So, I
All
mean,
right.
I think about it personally, just from, the experience that I have with inflation. It was just like, man, I'm seeing the car prices moving up. I'm seeing all this stuff moving up. Well, I'm not going to move into an expensive car. I went and bought cheap cars. In fact, I bought a couple of them because I need a backup, because if you're driving a cheap car, most likely it's going to break down. So me personally, I'm like actually reactive to the inflationary scenario in a way that then provides me with the ability to not to almost be immune to it. Like I'm not experiencing high insurance costs like on a big old expensive vehicle. I drive a 99 Ford Explorer, right? It's like this is in understanding it for what it really is, right? Money printer go up or money printer go off, it does create the money supply, right? However, that money supply needs to start chasing goods and services. And if the goods and services that are being provided for are limited, you are going to find increase in prices. That's all there is to it, right? You can print up all the money, $4.5 trillion on a balance sheet, and find almost no inflation within the consumer prices. Right? Why? It's because there was plenty of supply to meet the demand. There was no offset to that. The moment that you break that down, you're going to start finding prices moving up. So it's easy to blame the Fed, but it's harder to find the real reasons.
It seems like the real reason is it's the currency's a Ponzi scheme, and this is all part of it. And it's
Mhm.
on average they last about 50 years. Being we're on the world reserve currency in the United States, it's lasted a little bit longer. But I
Yeah.
think we're at the end of its. Let's say we're at the end of its uh, strength. Even though the dollar's going up, it's so crazy. The stock market goes down, the dollar goes up. It's still a safe haven.
Yeah.
It's a lot to wrap your mind around. I'm not sure. I do agree with you
Okay.
100% on supply and demand.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to take half of the all-time high and call it, because that's a volatile thing. But it is run by supply and demand. And I do get it. The problem, I guess, is oil comes down. Let's say, is that going to help inflation? Oil is extremely inflationary. OPEC can cut or add to and run our inflation up. The whole economy runs off diesel fuel. It's the
Yeah.
lifeblood of the economy. Uh,
Yeah. I
I'm
mean,
just trying to think through it.
Yeah, I mean, all those things. I mean, I think those are all reactionary things that would definitely take place by governments and, the possibilities of, dollar destruction. But I mean, I guess after time, I kind of realized that the dollar is a currency, it's not money, right? Money holds value, money is something that is preserving. It's currency. It's meant to trade goods and services for other goods and services. And the moment that we attempt to do something else with it, like use it as a store of value, it begins to break down. We get upset with that, right? But that's not what I mean. Even though we wish and hope and dream that it would do that, or that we believe in our being that it should be that way, it's not. It's just not that way, right? And so we can wish and hope and dream for it to be a store of value. It's not, right? Now, it can be a buying opportunity by holding on to it and finding something cheaper in the future. And by that, it's a strategic move in it. But to position yourself saying, hey, I want to have a $20 be have the purchasing power of, today that it will in 20 years or now from now, it's not going to work. It's not that's like it's not going to happen. And so it's better just to understand that's not the way it works. You have to convert that dollar over into something else and then hope that will then increase in price and have a speculative thought on it, or you put it towards an investment that's going to have a return, like rental property or dividend paying stock or something of that nature. Like you have to be strategic with that move. Understanding it in that fashion then now alleviates the problem of it's losing value, right? It's like it wasn't meant to store it anyhow. And that's why silver and gold was actually limited on the amount of transactions that were available to the world, right? So if you had an industrious person or an industrious nation who then sold all these products and hoarded all the gold, the rest of these nations wouldn't be able to do transactions. What happens then? Right now, they're going to stop doing transactions with you. You got to figure out a way that you're going to be able to survive. And now you're relinquishing your gold back out there to the world. And this is like a system that takes place. It's the increase and decrease of business cycles. And now being aware of that, allows you to position yourself to be like, okay, I can take care of like the problems of a low business cycle if I have saved during the good times. Most people don't do that. So we end up with these very frustrated depressionary aspects to the economy. Then the government steps in and says, well, maybe we can make it a little bit more smoothed out with an elastic money supply. We can start adding currency into this and start to float through the business cycles, right? Well, now you got debt cycles that are taking place. And if you have ever increasing amounts of new debt coming into the system, you're going to have the separation between the rich and the poor. Again, it's just like, it's better to understand it. This is the fashion in which it's happening. If you want to be on the other side of the wedge and you want to take advantage of the situation, you have to recognize that you have to borrow that new money, go buy at cash flowing assets, and then get on that side of the wedge. If you want it to be any other way, good luck. It's not going to work, right? I mean, until the entire system collapses, right? That's the idea of having like working hard, acquiring money, and then using that money to preserve your wealth is not going to work. It's going to fail you, right? And now I don't like it. I don't like that idea. Like I want to work hard. I want to save my money. I want to have a purchasing power on my cash that goes into the future, but it's not going to be there. It's just like, I mean, as much as I wish and hope and dream for it, it ain't going to be there. So it's just best to understand the system for what it is. And then even still on top of that, you watching the rest of these currencies around the world not doing that well. The United States actually has a fairly strong dollar comparatively to the world. We should take advantage of that situation, right? Buy those foreign products, enjoy that stuff, right? Because the only way we're going to fix the system is to literally not do that, to work hard, save the money, reinvest it, not participate in luxuries, not increase our standard of livings, not do all the stuff that people would naturally enjoy doing as a human being. We would have to not do that. So I don't see it happening. Like people want to enjoy the hard work and their savings that they've had. And that is the exact problem that starts creating the separation between the rich and the poor. It's best just to understand it for what it is and then take advantage of that situation as best you can. I mean, it's like, what are you going to do? Like, I
Well,
mean,
nobody's going to pick austerity.
no,
Certainly the government's not. They're going to do whatever it takes to keep it going as long as they can. Are you in the realm of the death of the dollar and the BRICS currencies being backed by real commodities like oil and gold and data and 5G and the Belt and Road and you know are you do you think that is a rival to the new currency?
nope,
I mean, to our currency?
nope. And the reason why is because of something called Gresham's law, right? Excuse me 1 second. Let me open up the door. It's getting a little warm out here. Something called Gresham's law, where bad money chases out good, right? So the moment that you try to introduce a good currency, like anything that's limited, gold, silver, any kind of commodity-based currency, that's a good currency. People like who are going to look at that and say, hey, if you're going to offer gold, I'm going to hoard it, right? So here's an easy way to kind of look at it. If I was a merchant and you came to me with $1 in one hand and a gold coin in the other, and I told you, hey, I'll take either one of those, which one are you going to give me? Right? I mean, you're going
Give
to
me
give
the
me that dollar,
dollar.
right? You're not going to
Oh
give me
yeah,
the
for
gold.
sure.
Yeah, right. What's going to happen with the gold coin is going to go back and it's going to sit on your shelf and you're not going to spend it. You're going to spend those dollars into the system. And that's why bad money chases out good. So Gresham's law is going to prevent any new currency from coming into the system that has any kind of good quality to it, like a gold backing or commodity backing or anything like that. Not saying that a good currency couldn't exist. That could exist. The problem with it is that the bad currency has to completely collapse, meaning that nobody will be willing to accept it. And the idea is there. However, if you look across the globe, you are going to find there is more dollar denominated debt out there than just about anything that you could ever possibly have imagining existing. And that dollar denominated debt is going to demand dollars to extinguish it. Now, here's the bigger problem. That dollar denominated debt within itself, right, is being used as cash, right, as transactions around the world. So not only do you have the dollars, US treasuries, but these other contracts that people have written that is all being used for global transactions. And if you get rid of the dollar, you're going to get rid of all those transactional abilities. Right now, nations are going to be suffering with the idea that they are limited to the amount of gold that they have in order to do the transactions, which is going to be very limited. Right? This is the problem that they are going to be facing. Now,
Oh,
right? Now, if we take it back this a little bit further, right? If you want to replace the dollar and do what the dollar is doing, right? Because you're not going to be able to replace it with gold. People are going to hoard it. And they're not going to do it. There won't be transactions and everybody will suffer in depression because of it, right? They have to have an elastic money supply in order to facilitate the amount of transactions that we have around the world. Right? If you need limited to gold, Bitcoin, all this other stuff, there's still a limited amount of currency that is there to facilitate the trades. With dollars, you have unlimited amount of currencies to do it with. So now, if you want another nation to step up and do what the dollar is doing, that means they have to do two things. One, they have to be able to go into debt as much as the United States is. And although a lot of people don't necessarily trust the United States, the US Treasury is by far the most safe and liquid asset in the entire world. Right. So if you have a US Treasury, you have something almost as good as cash. There is no other nation that is going to be willing to go into debt as much as the United States has done in order to provide the world with that safe and liquid asset like US Treasuries. Now, on top of that, there's another thing that the United States is doing, and that is something called Triffin's dilemma, right? Now, that is you have to import more stuff than you export, because if you import stuff, you will export dollars. Now you can get your dollars out there to the world because there's a huge demand for dollars in order to facilitate the dollar denominated debt and all the transactions that are wanting to be done around the
Hold
world.
up just a second. Hold on a
Yeah.
second. I got to go back to.
Yeah.
So you said another country.
Mhm.
Well, we're not talking about another country. We're talking about BRICS plus.
Well,
We're talking about.
all I guess I'm getting at is that even those accumulated countries would have to accumulatively get together and say, we are going to issue out a safe and liquid asset.
Well, that's
like
what
the
it is,
U.S.
right?
Treasury, right? No nation, those nations want to produce. They don't want to be debtors. They want to be producers. They want to export their commodities and bring in cash. All of them do. How are they going to do that? They
How many
can't.
times can you weaponize a currency like we did to Russia? How many times can you send freshly?
Apparently indefinitely. I mean,
Well,
I'm not
no,
saying it's a good deal, but apparently it can continue
so
on.
you're in the camp that the dollar is going to be around forever?
No. I am not in that camp. What I am saying is that right now, from what we are experiencing, there is nothing out there that can compete against what the dollar is doing.
Term.
That's what I'm, well, it's short or long. I mean, if you had asked me 15 years ago how much longer the dollar has to go, I would have said it would have been gone by now. I had to change my tune, right? I had to figure out why it is that I was wrong before to figure out why it is that things are going to continue on today. See, now the problem is that the dollar should fail, but it's not going to because of something called digital currencies. Right. So the dollar should fail. There should be a point in which that, okay, nobody's going to accept your debt anymore. Nobody's going to accept treasuries. They don't find it as a safe and liquid asset, and all this stuff starts to fail and collapse. Okay, that should take place. Absolutely. This is the life cycle of a fiat currency. However, if there is something that can step up, that can allow for the system to continue operation at the lower bound of zero, meaning that is no longer a bound, right? It's not holding them up, which is negative interest rates. And this is something that the economy and nobody in the history of time has ever experienced on a massive scale. Now, there is no way of taking interest rates into negative territory, because the moment that you do it, everybody's going to pull their money out in cash, right? Why would I hold my money in the bank if it's going to have a negative interest rates? At least cash has a zero yield to it, and I don't have to worry about having a negative rate upon it. Here's the issue with it, right? If you start issuing out a digital currency, you have two of them trading side by side. Next thing you know, you have digital currencies out there. Cash can be removed from the system, leaving nothing but a digital currency out there. And you will have no other choice, because then they can take interest rates into negative territory. You have no ability to pull the cash out.
It's
right?
essentially controlling the velocity, right?
That's
The velocity
right.
of money.
Exactly right. And you can see the steps that are leading up to this. This is total I mean, don't get me wrong, man. I am not a fan of the government. I am not a fan of the dollar. I am not a fan of the Federal Reserve. I am not a fan of any of the stuff that is happening. I am a hardcore libertarian. And if anything, I would be probably an anarchist, right? Like, I mean, that would be my true feelings, that if I could get government completely out of my life 100%, that would make me like really super happy. It's not going to happen. Right. I mean, I've gone down the sovereign citizen road and looked at it, and, I'm a constitutionalist. I can quote stuff out of the Constitution like nobody's business. But to understand the situation for what it really is, right? I cannot rally the people up to think like me. I can only make decisions for myself, and I can recognize what it is that has taken place out there. We are going to move into something called stable coins. Right? Stable coins are already taken place. You can find the statements within the Federal Reserve. They are trying to regulate this. They are trying to get the market together in a way that these stable coins will be accepted within the financial system. And the reason why they're doing it through these stable coins as opposed to like maybe a central bank digital currency is that any monetary policy adjustment that's done to the dollar, anything that is being backed by the dollar, like a stable coin or a foreign currency or a foreign nation out there, monetary policy will transfer through that. They have said this so many times within their statements. So they don't need to develop anything themselves. They can let the market take care of that business all on its own. Right? And by backing the stable coins with dollars, the Federal Reserve has the adjustment of monetary policy right into the stable coin itself. Now, once you have stable coins work in the system, you can remove the cash out because the stable coins are essentially being backed by the cash, right? So you get all these stable coins out, cash gets out of the system. Now you got stable coins being used on a regular basis within the economy. Who's to say what those stable coins are backed by? Right? Does it need to be backed by the dollar? Ben Bernanke, in a speech given back in 2002, talking about deflation and how to prevent it from ever occurring here in the United States, said that the Federal Reserve would be limited on how many U.S. treasuries it could buy. They could only force the government to go into so much debt, right? And they say you're on an unsustainable debt path. But then Ben Bernanke gave the option that they could purchase that of foreign assets, buying the debt of foreign nations. Can you imagine what it would be like to have a digital currency, stable coins, being backed by dollars that has the Federal Reserve sitting on the assets of foreign nations? Holy moly. Talk about the menu of purchases and how much they can flood the world with dollars at that point. See, this is the path that I believe that they're going on. This is like everybody's focused in on this, and they're throwing their attention off of the real problem, right? The dollar is not doesn't have competition to it. There is nobody. They're like distant second is so far away. Like, it's just like a far off concept. But the ability to issue a stable coin, have the people using it, accepting it, then backing that stable coin with whatever you want, that I believe is a new world order dream.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're in the same camp.
We are,
That is,
man. I am like, I know I don't like the idea, but I had to come accepting of it. Like, I mean, it's just like, this is just the way it is, no matter how much I want to fight it. Right.
yeah. Yeah, well you'll if you don't accept the way things are, what would Mark Twain say? It's not what you don't know, it's what you do know that's just not true.
You're right.
I mean,
It's right. It's yeah.
yeah, I get it, and it's extremely hard for me to wrap my mind around how we're going to do business with other countries when but that's how it works. That's how the machine works, and the numbers going up is just that. It's just numbers going up. That we're still in that cycle. I'm assuming you still hold precious metals. You still hedge your wealth with precious metals.
Absolutely. Here's what I find very, very kind of ironic. Personally, I don't think there's anything better to have in your physical possession. What's that?
That's my wife. Yeah. She sells a precious metal for Miles Franklin, and we do our best to get encourage people to get 3 bids because I want people to have real money. The reason we started selling it is to get the best prices, and this so far is the way to do it. If you text your email or your phone number, she'll send you a price list, and you can shop around with it. So screenshot that. I just want to put a quick plug for her.
Absolutely.
Because I think as the dollar gets stronger, it's just like you said, it's going to be time to buy real money. Sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely. I mean, I totally appreciate you getting out there and hustling the silver out there, because that's really what I think everybody should really have in their physical possession is silver and ammo, right? If you don't have any way of protecting yourself, then there's no point in having the silver because somebody can just come and take it from you. So you need to be able to protect yourself if you're going to have the physical silver on hand. But there is nothing better out there. It gets you away from that third-party claim. You don't have to worry about a phone call, an app, an envelope in the mail, or a business out there. It is literally in your hands, your possession, and there is no better time to buy this stuff because just like we were saying earlier, It's at 50% of its all-time high. Like, I mean, well, slightly above it, but still buying opportunity that shouldn't be here is here, and we should take advantage of that. And I know I do. Like, I try to buy silver at least once a month, a dollar cost average. I don't think about the price of it. It is best to get the best price you can, so definitely shop around and look. But ultimately, the accumulation all the time, regularly, forever, right? And
You have
not
a
even think about
percentage?
how much it's worth, but just how many ounces do I have? Keep stacking, right?
Do you have a percentage? Do you have a
Uh,
certain percentage of your net wealth you keep in precious
um,
metals?
to be on, like there was a time I was 100%.
Oh, wow.
100% in the silver, right? I had completely given up on the government, on everything else out there. I didn't carry a cell phone and I didn't have a bank account, right? I like did everything in cash. My wife had a bank account so we could pay bills with. Um, and that was like literally the life that I was experiencing. Now it didn't work out too well, especially when silver was at like $40 an ounce, and I thought I was the smartest person in the world, and then it dropped all the way down into the teens, and I had come completely underwater on my purchases and
That's
everything else, and I was
man,
just like, you know, screw that. I am not buying silver to try and make money with. That is not the purpose of it. It is an insurance policy. Now,
that is it. Perfect.
years down the road, I had a busted down car. I was completely in debt. I had no money, no way of getting to work. And I was at desperation. I called my buddy up and I'm like, bro, do you still have that Tahoe for sale? And he's like, yeah, And I said, dude, will you trade silver for it? And he says, hell yeah, I'll trade silver for it. And I was like, will you please drive it up here? And he says, I'll see you in a few minutes. Right. So he drove up with the title. I traded 165 ounces and I was on the road again. Boom. Right. Talk about one of the greatest feelings in the world, having that ability to do something like that. And there's nothing like that. Even if you're at your brokest, you're worse, you're in debt, you're all that. If you have a box of silver, you might be able to still sleep at night.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Most of the wealthy people I know that watch macroeconomics that have similar views do that. Just that insurance. That's what I tell people. If you try to get rich on silver, if you put 100% of your wealth in anything, you're going to lose. That's been my experience. Seems like it's been yours too.
Yep, straight up. Straight up, man.
Well,
I think about like if I had invested in the Dow at the time, you know how much money I would have.
oh man, don't. Yeah, I
You
can't.
and so,
I
but
didn't
I
take
don't,
advantage of it either.
whatever. It's just like it's lessons learned, and this is why it is that I'm able to do some of the things that I'm able to do today is because you have to take kind of some of the punishment and understandings of why it is that took place, and learn from it. So
Well, we're a
that's
lot
what I do.
alike, buddy.
Yeah,
I get my lessons good and hard as well. And yeah, it's just a blessing to have you on. I appreciate you coming on, and I hope
yeah,
we do it again.
yeah. You bet, man. I mean, it was a great conversation. I love doing it and sharing my ideas and you know, being able to,
Well,
I mean, this
our
is really what
host,
it comes down to is just like sharing these ideas, having the conversation about it. Nobody's going to be able to get it right. Nobody is, got it perfect, but everybody has their own economy that they have to deal with, right? Nobody knows us like we know us. If we're 18 years old trying to get a start or 80 years old trying to figure out how to save our retirement, we have to figure this stuff out for ourselves so that we can position ourselves right. And by having these discussions, this is really how we get the ideas of what it is that we need to do for ourselves. And it doesn't
coming
happen
up
any other way.
with the answer on your own. Build the conviction, come up with a percentage to do whatever you're going to do, and then you'll stick with it. If you don't, if you run to something because you just know it's going to go up, good luck. That is a rough road. And you said nobody knows us like we know us. Well, nobody can lie to me like I can.
That's for
You know,
sure,
that's
man.
it's the same thing.
That's the truth.
All right, brother. Have an awesome, awesome day. We'll
You
see
too,
you
man.
guys in the next one.
All right,
Later.
you as well.